Hello there one and all. The time has come for me to do another Star Wars video, so today I'm going to be ranking every Star Wars movie from least favorite to favorite. In preparation, I went back and rewatched all the movies in release order, so my memory is fresh for giving an updated opinion on each film. A few notes before we begin. I'm only looking at the 12 Star Wars movies that were released theatrically in North America, so stuff like the Ewok films or other movies that were made for TV won't be covered in this video. I also want to make clear that no matter how critical I may sound, I don't dislike any of these movies, and I certainly don't hate any of them. I like or love them all in some way, and regardless of any problems they may have, Star Wars will always be special to me. My ranking for these movies is also constantly changing and can vary based on viewing order, what mood I'm in, and what lens I happen to look at the movies through. To demonstrate this, I'll show you my ranking of the Skywalker saga from last December at the end of this video. By then you'll have seen just how much my ranking has changed and how the standalone movies factor in. So with all of that out of the way, let's jump in and see how I rank all 12 Star Wars movies from worst to best. Starting off at number 12, we have the Clone Wars animated movie. Now, I almost didn't include this one in my ranking because, honestly, I can't fully see it as being its own movie, because this movie wasn't originally intended to be released in theaters. It was meant to be a 4-part pilot to the Clone Wars TV series, and it really shows. There is a lot that I do like in this movie. I love the voice cast, and Matt Lanter in particular does a really good job of bringing his own take to the character of Anakin Skywalker. James Arnold Taylor also makes a good Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I love Ashley Eckstein as Ahsoka Tano, and I think George Lucas made the right call when he decided to have Ahsoka be Anakin's Padawan instead of Obi-Wan's. It's really cool to see them bond over their similar shortcomings as apprentices, but also that Anakin kinda has to learn from Ahsoka some of the time. It adds a lot more depth to Anakin's overall character arc, and they have a lot of really cool moments in the movie. That said, there's also a lot weighing this movie down, like some really annoying characters, animation that you can tell they were clearly figuring out, and the plot just really not being that interesting overall. So I don't hate this movie, and there is a lot of good stuff that it brings to the table, but as I said, I just can't fully see it as being its own movie. I just see it as part of the Clone Wars TV series as a whole. And at number 11 is The Phantom Menace. Now, to be fair, I would probably rewatch this movie before I would rewatch some of the movies a little higher on the list, but I also acknowledge that kind of has to do with it being a part of the Skywalker saga. This time around, I just didn't enjoy The Phantom Menace as much as I usually do, and I do have to acknowledge that it has a lot of problems weighing it down. The biggest problem is that there's just an apparent lack of energy throughout the entire thing, from the overall picture to the wooden acting style. All of that just really screams like there's just not as much effort being put forward, and it can kind of take you out of the experience. I do really appreciate the story though. I love seeing how the Republic and the Jedi Order have kind of lost their way in this movie, and how Palpatine is able to manipulate this to his advantage. It paints a picture of where the saga is heading and makes for a really compelling story to get behind. I also love kind of the mystery around Anakin Skywalker's character. I love Qui-Gon Jinn, Ewan McGregor is good as Obi-Wan Kenobi, so there is definitely a lot of good stuff in this movie, and I would rewatch it before some of the movies a little higher on the list. But unfortunately, in terms of just the overall picture quality, a lot of stuff that really doesn't work, I do have to acknowledge that this probably puts it at the bottom of the live action films. Next at number 10, we have Solo, A Star Wars Story. Now, I was honestly surprised that this time around I put the movie so low on the list, but I really just didn't enjoy it as much this time around, and I finally see a lot of the problems it has after defending it so many times in the past. I really like Alden Ehrenreich as Han Solo. I mean, obviously he doesn't pass for a young Harrison Ford, but I like what he brings to the role, and I do enjoy his performance in the movie. I also have mixed feelings on the movie's overall picture quality. On the one hand, I can appreciate that they relied on mostly natural lighting in order to create a kind of shady and grimy criminal underworld, but at the same time I really like being able to see what I'm watching, and there are moments that you'll miss because you just can't see what's happening. I also think that they tried to put just too much into one movie, which is understandable since they didn't know if they would get a sequel, but at a certain point it feels like all the important elements of Han's backstory are happening too close together. If I remember correctly, this movie was originally supposed to be set over the course of 6 years, so if that had been the case, it may have worked better. The events may have worked better if they were spaced out over a trilogy, much like the Han Solo trilogy books by A.C. Crispin. The writing also just isn't really that good at times, with a lot of awkward moments that kind of clash with the tone the film is going for, although I do appreciate a lot of the plot details and references that kind of make it feel connected to the larger Star Wars universe. Of course, fan service and references don't make a movie better as a whole, but I appreciate them nonetheless. As it stands though, it's mostly just a fun movie that could have been a lot better if they had maybe just not had so much put into it, if they had brightened the overall picture quality, and if they had gotten rid of a few of the elements that just don't work. At number 9, we have Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. While this movie does have problems that I will get into, I will admit that a lot of my reason for putting it so low on the list is not because it's necessarily a bad movie, but because it's just not really for me. I understand what they were going for. They were trying to make a grittier, more realistic, somewhat morally gray war film, and that's fine, but I guess I just prefer the style of the episodic films. That's not to say I automatically dislike spin-off Star Wars material, it just means that not everything is going to work for me. The movie is very beautifully made, and they do a good job of capturing the visual aesthetic of the original trilogy. I like the sense of tragedy it has. You can tell that this isn't a perfectly happy ending, and it kind of makes you appreciate the events of the next film a little more. I also like many of the characters, particularly Galen Erso and Orson Krennic. I loved their respective stories and would have liked to see more of them. But honestly, I just feel that there were too many characters and that there wasn't enough time to develop them properly. It also doesn't really feel like one cohesive movie made by one person. While Gareth Edwards did direct the movie, Tony Gilroy was brought in to do reshoots, which results in the third act feeling much different from the first two acts. You could argue that this third act is really fun, which it is, and that it helps transition into the tone of A New Hope, but it also is just kind of jarring when you try to look at the movie cohesively. If the movie had felt more like the third act, and if they had the characters together from the beginning so that there was more time to develop them and go into their respective stories, then it may have worked better. But as it stands, it's a very well made movie that tried something different, but it just doesn't really work for me personally. At number 8, we have the most recent entry in the Skywalker saga, The Rise of Skywalker. I actually did a video on this recently if you want to check that out, but to sum it up, the movie's biggest problem is that it just tried to do too much and the pacing is way too fast. I understand that this was the last movie in the trilogy, and obviously with J.J. Abrams returning to direct, he would naturally want to bring in some of the ideas that he had since The Force Awakens, but I feel the way he did so went a little too much against The Last Jedi and tried to put in too much new stuff when there really wasn't enough time to do so. I'm really not a huge fan of Rey being Palpatine's granddaughter, one because it goes against the idea of Rey being a nobody, which I and many fans really like, but also because it's just too late in the trilogy to try to get to it. I also have mixed feelings on Palpatine being in the movie at all. On the one hand, I love Ian McDiarmid and this is possibly his best performance as Palpatine yet. On the other hand, his appearance does kind of come out of nowhere, and he's really not even focused on that much apart from the beginning, some parts in the middle, and then at the end. The movie is very fun and fast-paced though, and it feels like a roller coaster, but I almost felt this time that I was turning my brain off to go along with the roller coaster because there just wasn't enough time to process all the stuff that happens. Still, apart from a few scenes, it is a very exceptionally made and good looking movie, and I can enjoy it, and it is nice to have closure to this trilogy, but as time has gone on, I've just come to realize that as an end to this trilogy and the Skywalker saga, it does leave much to be desired. And for number 7, we have Attack of the Clones. Now, out of all the movies on this list, this one was probably the most surprising to me that I ranked it this high. In the past, Attack of the Clones was often my least favorite Star Wars movie, or at least in the bottom 2. And even though, like Phantom Menace, I would probably watch it before the anthology movies, I automatically ranked it below those movies because I just felt compelled to see it as the worst. But as time has gone on, I realized that I actually enjoyed this movie quite a bit, and I've come to appreciate a lot of what it does right. I also look at many of the common criticisms in a different way. The movie does make a lot of improvements over the Phantom Menace. There is a lot more energy and therefore the acting is better. As I said before, I feel a lot of the criticisms for the wooden acting that the prequel trilogy gets primarily comes from episode 1, so here the performances don't really bother me as much. I think Hayden Christensen actually does a serviceable job as Anakin Skywalker, and I've kind of come to have a new appreciation of Anakin's character. I think he works better if you kind of look at him as a broken man. He was a really good child who had a father figure in Obi-Wan, a loving mother, a possible future romance with Padme, but then suddenly he lost all those at once, and then he grew up in an order that told him to be both detached from his feelings and also told him that he couldn't use this power inside of him fully in order to help people. So while this doesn't justify some of his behavior and actions in the movie, it does help you kind of understand why he is the way he is, and also serves to set up who he's going to be down the road. The movie has a lot of fun action and intrigue. I really like Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi and his entire subplot, and while a lot of the romance between Anakin and Padme is kind of forced, a lot of it really doesn't bug me the way it used to. The movie really starts to pick up in the last half hour when we get to the arena battle and the final lightsaber duel. Obviously the movie has other problems. It can be slower paced than necessary at times. A lot of the digital effects that they were transitioning to really don't hold up that well, and a lot of it does feel kind of awkward. But to sum it up, despite its problems and the tweaks that I would probably make to the story, I've actually come to appreciate it a little more over time, and I enjoy it quite a bit. At number 6 we have The Force Awakens. I was originally a little tempted to put it lower on the list because of some of the things that I'll mention, but I feel that there's so much care and craft put into the filmmaking of this movie that I think it deserves to be a little higher. And you can't deny that this movie is incredibly well made, from the color contrast to the intense action to the performances to kind of a return to emphasis on more practical effects that make this a really good looking movie. It also has a really nice sense of fun and adventure, and it does a good job with developing all its characters and having a lot of emotional weight. I do kind of like the idea of having this mystery of what's happened since Return of the Jedi and slowly introducing the old characters one at a time. However, obviously the movie's big problem is that it's a little too much of the same and not bringing enough new into the mix. I understand that they kind of wanted to use the framework of the original movie in order to get things started so that they could just focus on the quality of the film itself, but I think if they had brought more new to the mix to balance it out, then the movie would have been stronger for it. It is a little jarring to have a happy ending at the end of Return of the Jedi, then suddenly jump into this one and so much stuff has happened that we didn't see. And those similarities to A New Hope can really be distracting since this is supposed to be set in the same continuity as the older films. And while I appreciate J.J. Abrams' unique spin on this, like it very much feels like his style, it can also feel a little out of place to the George Lucas movies that came before. But overall, despite its problems, and even though it's not as original as we would have liked, it's still a very well made and heartfelt movie, so for that reason it gets a pass and is a little higher on the list. For number 5, we have The Last Jedi. This is a very divisive movie among Star Wars fans, and I absolutely understand why. I too have mixed feelings on it from time to time when I rewatch it. The movie is certainly not perfect, but despite its problems, I've just really come to appreciate it over time and what it brings to the franchise. Obviously, the most divisive part of this movie is how Luke Skywalker is portrayed, and it does take a little while to get used to. I mean, he was the embodiment of the hero's journey in the original trilogy, and he became a legend to all of us, so I understand why some people weren't happy to see him this way, but you've got to remember that this is Luke at his lowest point after he's made a huge mistake and has the weight of the world on his shoulders. In fact, the movie is built around what the legend of Luke Skywalker means to people, and Luke has to come to realize just how important that is, and then he needs to pick himself back up. But it's also a message that is actually kind of consistent with the original trilogy. Luke was never a perfect character in those movies. In fact, there were often times where people said that he wasn't the only one destined to save the galaxy. Like all that talk about Luke saying that Leia had that power too and that she would learn to use it and that she's the only hope for the Alliance, and then it seems that he's the one destined to save the galaxy, but as we all know, Anakin Skywalker was the chosen one, so Yoda's message about how we are what they grow beyond is actually really powerful, and seeing all our characters challenged in such an interesting way and having a movie revolve around deconstructing and challenging what we think we know about Star Wars allows for the franchise to grow. And I guess I just really appreciate just how different and unique it feels, how it brings new to the franchise and tried interesting things. The movie is also beautifully made with absolutely amazing set design, colors, and it has kind of a more film-like look, and they try to make the technology more consistent with the OT, which I appreciate. Other things I like include the Rashomon flashbacks, the Praetorian Guard duel, Kylo Ren's development, the better CGI and more fun energy that Snoke has. You can tell Andy Serkis is having a lot of fun, and the action in general. So yeah, it's not a perfect movie, but I appreciate everything it does right. For number 4, we have Revenge of the Sith. This is many people's favorite Star Wars movie among my generation, and it's understandable why. I remember as a kid, this movie blew me away, and it was by far my favorite movie in the entire franchise. I've gone back and forth on it in the past, but I really enjoyed it this time around. This is by far the best looking of the prequel films. You can tell they had really gotten a grasp on the sense of scope and the digital effects, but they added a little more practicality to it, and they also tried to make things line up with the look and style of A New Hope. I love how everyone has characterized this movie. Hayden Christensen's performance as Anakin Skywalker is much better. Ewan McGregor is a perfect Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I really enjoy Frank Oz as Yoda and Sam Jackson as Mace Windu. And while the sense of scope and the special effects and the overall look and colors are really good, I just really appreciate the story this time around. A lot of people say that Anakin's turn to the dark side was a little too sudden in this movie, but you have to remember that this has been building up from the first two movies. In this movie, Anakin is a much better man than he was in Attack of the Clones. Obi-Wan is now his friend instead of his mentor. He's gained a lot more status in the Jedi Order. He's given an avenue to to use his powers for good in the war. He and Padme are together now, and she has clearly had a positive influence on him, but as the movie goes on, he slowly fears that he is about to lose everything, which makes all of his worst qualities come back. This is also the movie where Palpatine finally shows his true colors and is a master manipulator at getting Anakin to join his side to wipe out the Jedi Order and to form the Galactic Empire. Speaking of which, Order 66 is a really intense sequence, and the entire second half of this movie is just really awesome. Yes, a lot of it is over the top, including the lightsaber duels and the action and all that stuff, but just the fun of it and the music and the fact that this has been building up for so long, I just can't help but get sucked in. The movie does still have some problems though. I feel that Padme was underused this time around in comparison to the first two movies. In the original 4-hour cut, she was going to have more to do off-screen separate from Anakin, but all that stuff had to be cut out, so she just doesn't have as much to do in the final version. The movie can also have some of the same problems that the first two prequel movies had, with some wooden acting and moments that kind of stick out and don't hold up that well. But whatever its problems may be, I just really enjoy Revenge of the Sith. I think it's a perfect companion to the original trilogy. I love the overall look and style, and I just appreciate how the story comes full circle and ends with a sense of tragedy. At number 3, we have Return of the Jedi. I sometimes put this one below Revenge of the Sith, but I usually enjoy Return of the Jedi more when I watch the theatrical version, which I did for this rewatch. While it is a step down from the first two movies in the original Star Wars trilogy, it just still has all the things that made those movies work. All of the characters are still great, I love how the story is resolved, the special effects are still amazing, it has a sense of fun and magic and some real emotional moments and some surprises that you probably just wouldn't have seen coming at the beginning of this trilogy. I have criticized the movie in the past for having so much setup and kind of being slow at the beginning and in the middle, but I've actually come to appreciate it in time. I feel the first half hour at Jabba's palace serves several purposes. It wraps up the Jabba subplot that had been building from the first two movies, it slowly reintroduces all our characters and show where they are now, it gives them one last fun adventure to go on before the story wraps up, and most importantly, it just shows what state Luke Skywalker is in. We get a slow scene with Yoda on Dagobah, so we can really process everything that has happened and is going to happen, which we get a few more scenes like that, such as when C-3PO is telling that story to the Ewoks. The movie's biggest problem is that it can get a little boring in the middle once we get to Endor, but it does pick up very quickly. I also feel that the production quality is a bit of a step down from the first two movies, but it is kind of understandable because of all the stuff that was going on the scenes, and I know that George Lucas was kind of just ready to get this trilogy wrapped up. But man, is the finale really exciting. As I said, it's a perfect wrap up to the story. A lot of surprising things happen. I really love Darth Vader's redemption, and Ian McDiarmid is just amazing as Palpatine, and I'm so glad that he would come back in later movies. So overall, it does have problems, but it's still a great end to a great trilogy. At number 2, which honestly could tie for number 1, is The Empire Strikes Back. I mean, what is there to say about this movie that hasn't already been said before? It's a fantastic movie, it's a perfect sequel to A New Hope. It takes everything that worked about A New Hope to begin with, but actually builds on it and raises the stakes. This is by far the best made movie out of the entire Star Wars saga, and it just feels so expertly crafted from beginning to end, like they really put care and attention to the whole thing, and I love when movies do that. This is also the best looking Star Wars movie with some really amazing cinematography, and the writing is just so on point. I read this article once showing how Empire Strikes Back is a perfectly parallel movie, and I think if you pay attention to the events that happen at the beginning and then happen at the end, you'll see what I mean. It really takes advantage of the slower pace to really get a look at all of our characters, to flesh them out a little more, and I love Luke's story of learning to become a Jedi, and Yoda is just an amazing character. I also love how they give Darth Vader more to do, and while the I am your father reveal has never been a huge twist for me because pop culture spoiled it, it's still a great moment, and I'm sure it was an amazing surprise when it came out back in 1980. So yeah, this is an amazing film. It's definitely one of the best Star Wars movies ever made. It could easily be number 1, but either way, it is a fantastic sequel that did an amazing job, and Star Wars would not be what it is without it. And finally, for number 1, the movie that started it all, we have A New Hope, or as it was known in 1977, Star Wars. For a while now, Empire has actually been my favorite, but this time around, I just enjoyed A New Hope a lot more. This movie feels expertly crafted, incredibly well made, and it really just gives the story time to breathe. Maybe it's just because I recently watched The Rise of Skywalker and the story was so fast-paced, but I actually found this time around that I just appreciated how it takes the time to introduce all all these characters, to establish the world, to have a sense of mystery. I used to have a problem with the first half essentially being just on Tatooine and only then do we get off to the adventure in space, but I just love how the movie takes its time. On that note, however, it can be a little slow once we're on Tatooine, a little boring for a while, and it doesn't look that good picture-wise, but as I said, it does make sense. The opening is meant to be the big action that starts the movie, and then it slows down a bit before it builds up again later. The soundtrack is perfect. John Williams cemented himself as a legend in history. The costumes are great. The special effects were groundbreaking. And as I've established as a pattern with my favorite Star Wars movies, I just love the ones that are carefully crafted and that have passion put into them. The action sequences are excited. The character chemistry is great. All the actors in this movie did a fantastic job. Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker, Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia, and Harrison Ford as Han Solo. Oh my god. The droids are also incredibly entertaining. C-3PO is great. Anthony Daniels does a great job, and R2-D2 is probably my favorite Star Wars character of all time. And the final battle at the Death Star combined with John Williams' intense score is one of the most exciting finales of all time. And I love the award ceremony. The music is perfect. It's perfectly shot. It is a great ending, a perfect ending to a wonderful movie. So yes, without a doubt, A New Hope, Star Wars is #1. So that's my ranking of all 12 Star Wars movies. As promised, here's my ranking of the Skywalker saga from last December. You can see how my ranking has changed since then, and it will be interesting to see how it changes again when I do an update of this video. But what do you guys think of my ranking? How would you rank all 12 films? Whatever it is, feel free to share your thoughts down below. If this is your first time on my channel, be sure to like, comment, and consider subscribing. Also be sure to check out my other Star Wars videos, it really means a lot. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and have a great day.